Hey guys, in today's video, we're going to talk about how to add rotation during your downswing. I'm going to show you what I think is the most important thing you need to do to add rotation. All right guys, let's talk about downswing rotation here, how to add rotation. There's a couple different things involved with why you might not have enough rotation or what you need to do to add rotation. But one thing is pretty much clear that I think is basically the most important part, or the most important thing you can do to assist adding rotation. And if you don't have this in there, it makes rotation really difficult. What I'm talking about is the tilts. Okay, so when I say tilts, I'm talking about the tilts of your hips or pelvis. Are they tilted in this direction, left side higher, right side lower, or the other direction, left side lower, right side higher, and the tilts of your shoulders. When I start at the starting address position, ideally, my hips at this point are reasonably level. Now my shoulders are going to have a little bit of a tilt to them. I'm going to have a little bit of right side bend. My right hand is lower on the grip. I'm going to have a little bit of tilt. But even with my shorter irons with the sand wedge, right, I'm looking to have very little tilt, essentially zero, maybe a degree. With like a 7 or 8 iron, I'm having a couple degrees of tilt, still not a lot. A little bit more with the driver's okay, but I'm a little bit higher left shoulder, higher than my right. Now, as I make my backswing and I go up to the top of my swing, from address to the top, there's no doubt I'm going to have my left side of my hip or pelvis a little bit lower than the right side of my hip. Most of that is due to the fact that my knees change flex. If I stand here normal and my knees are flexed the same amount, my hips are pretty level. If I flex my left knee more and lose flex in my right knee like this, I'm exaggerating a little bit, that serves to add some inclination to my hips. It's not the only movement that does that, but it's the main driver of adding inclination to my hips. You can watch any player, and I'll show you some there, and you'll see their right hip is higher than their left hip going back. That's not the point of this video, but I just want to kind of preface it here. And the same thing applies to my shoulders. As I make a turn during the backswing, my left shoulder should be very clearly lower than my right shoulder. Again, I'll show you that. The point here is, when I go to the top, my left hip is lower than my right hip. My left shoulder is lower in space than my right shoulder. Now in transition, in the beginning phases of the downswing, the goal is to keep that relationship the same. If you look at really good ball strikers, left hip's lower than the right hip at the top, left hip stays lower than the right hip in early transition. Left shoulder's lower than the right shoulder at the top, left shoulder stays lower than the right shoulder in transition. When you tilt that way or keep your tilts, it makes the rotation pieces a whole heck of a lot easier. What you don't want to do, which I run into sometimes, is to the top, left hip's lower than the right, left shoulder's lower than the right, and then right away going into a move where your left hip gets higher than your right hip and your left shoulder gets higher than your right shoulder. Now, if I do that same thing from down the line, you'll see I'm here, good at the top, and if I go up with my left hip and my left shoulder, how much rotation does it look like I have? The answer is very little, because it's very hard to do that. If I go here and I tilt up, that means I slide, right? As soon as I tilt this way, that means my left hip is moving this way. There's a slide, there's no rotation. Same thing here, tilt up, no rotation. So that to me is like the most important thing, meaning if you go and your left hip is too high in transition, you are not going to rotate well. It's 99.9% chance of that. Same with your left hip. You get super high here. Are there some guys that can rotate good and get a little bit high with their shoulder? Yes, but all else equal, both of those moves to me are like death moves for this stuff. I want from the top that left hip to go lower and that left shoulder to go lower. If you mess up the backswing pieces, the downswing pieces are a lot harder. What do I mean by that? I mean, when I go back, if I make a good backswing, my left hip is lower than my right, I said. Well, what happens if I go back and my left hip is not lower than my right and they're already level? Well, that means I'm probably not gonna re-lower it in transition. I'm already too high. I'm gonna probably make the same downswing move and then I'm gonna be too high as well. Does that make sense? When I go back, if I'm lower by X amount, I already preset it being lower. All I have to do is keep it lower in transition. If you don't preset it lower and you turn too level with it, you're probably in trouble. Are there some players who do that and get away with it? Sure there are. Same thing with my shoulders. I give a lot of online lessons and the shoulders here are perfectly level, they're flat. Well, guess what? Your left shoulder's already too high. Where are you going? You're going up this way. No rotation, right? Instead of if I'm here, left shoulder lower, well, Eric, I don't like that feel. Well, if you don't get your left shoulder lower here at the top, it's not going this way in transition, right? If you're here, you're done. I see so many videos of people who turn back perfectly flat and then they wonder why they have no rotation. Well, it's a reaction to the backswing pieces. Your left hip should be lower than your right and your left shoulder should be lower than your right going back. And then in transition, this is where the feels come in. I love, because I'm this way, I'm this guy, I turn too level, I'm guilty of what I just said, okay? And then when I come down, because I'm too level and I don't rotate enough. So when I get some more tilts going, I really like the sensation of my left hip for me, feeling like it goes down. I feel like in my mind, my left hip is getting closer to my ankle, is what I feel as I rotate. Obviously, I feel like my legs reflex a lot. I'm actually rotating this leg, but I really feel like my hip, my left side of my belt buckle is getting closer to my ankle. I can feel my ankle pressing into the ground when I do that, okay? Same thing with my left shoulder. I feel my left shoulder's going down. I feel like I'm doing like a side crunch here from the top. Left shoulder's going down and around. Now listen, from the top, if I actually do that, notice how my head moves forward towards the target. I need to add in some right side bend as I do that to turn. That may be too technical for some of you guys, just that when you watch this, you see my head goes forward. Eventually, you have to add right side bend. That's another video. You guys all like drills? I'm not a big drill guy, but we're gonna do some. So left side of the pelvis or the hips. What I typically would do for this, just for a visual, and I like to have a mirror, right, or video. I say all the time, I want you guys having feedback, not just guessing at these things. So mirror video with these things too. I'm curious when you guys play through this, comment down below or let me know what you guys feel when you do it. But what I feel is I put this stick in, right? Should be pretty level to the ground at my address position. When I go to the top, obviously, what is it? Pointed down towards the ground. It's not pointed up towards the sky. It's pointed down towards the ground. Now my goal is to point that thing more down towards the ground and more to the left as I go. Slight exaggeration, but my goal again is going to be point it more down and point it more to the left as I do my rotation pieces. And you can hit with this in even to feel it. Sometimes you put an object over there. Like sometimes I'll put a little, something kind of small in the ground like this. That's lower, that makes me hit that. So I would feel the same things. I go up and I feel down and around as I go through. I'll do a little one here. Make sure this stick isn't too far to the right so you don't hurt yourself. We are not liable for that, I don't think. So we'll do a little one here, left side of the pelvis going down and around. Yeah, and that always feels really good for me when I do that. Now, that's a drill you can do. You can feel that, right? So how do you do the drill stuff with this? Well, it's different for everyone, but I'd go up to the top, feel that once or twice, hit an object that's lower, use a mirror video or whatever for feedback, and then try one. And then obviously, hopefully you're recording that or you have some sort of form of feedback so you know you're doing it correctly. The shoulders, you're not gonna hit with something on your shoulders, but essentially you would feel the same things. You could even just take that and put a club across right here like this, just to kind of feel that. I go up to the top, butt of the club's going kind of down and to the left. I'm gonna add a little bit of right side bend. I'm exaggerating those moves. And you could hit and feel the same thing. Listen, I like you guys to hit balls and just feel and try it. Everyone yells like they need a drill for something, and I like you having feedback, but you can record it, feel it, try with a full swing, see what happens and go from there, right? It's perfectly okay. So same thing with the left shoulder. I'm feeling down and around for both of them. Let's go ahead and do one more. Down and around. Gotta hit that one a little bit thin. I'm gonna try that one more again. First one felt better. I really like feeling the pelvis part. Like I said, the sort of left hip toward the ankle from here is the feel that I like. Again, I'm curious what you guys feel. Leave me a comment. That one felt better. Cool. Listen guys, that's the pelvis motion. That's the tilts. The point here is if your tilts are off, meaning your left side of your pelvis or shoulder are too high during the downswing, you're not going to rotate well. If they're not low enough going back, you're gonna have to do a lot to get them low in transition. I think I talked you through that there. Hope that makes sense. Hopefully the swings that we're gonna add to some of these, so you can see the best players, some other players actually doing it in slow motion helps your visual. I would add the alignment rod as a feel piece, but just play with it and see what happens with it. And I'm telling you, when you record it, when you exaggerate that piece and do it more and more and check your feedback on the video, it will make your rotation pieces a heck of a lot easier during the downswing. So let's take a look at some of these guys here and look at how they tilt. Again, we're looking at the left side of the pelvis relative to the right side, or left side of the hip relative to the right side, and also the left shoulder relative to the right shoulder. Now we talk, when we go up to the top, right, we know that at the top of the swing, both the left part of the pelvis will be higher, or lower rather, sorry, the left part of the pelvis will be lower than the right pelvis, and the left shoulder will be lower than the right shoulder, right? So that should be fairly evident, that you can see that there's a little tilt of the hips, a little slant of the pelvis there, and a tilting of the shoulder. So the left shoulder and the left hip are both lower. Now the point here, what we're talking about, is in transition, as you begin down, the goal is not to make the left hip go immediately upward, and the goal is not to make the left shoulder go immediately up. Okay, when we watch these good players, now some of them do it at different rates. It also depends on when they go back, right? Obviously, guys that go back that have their left hip a lot lower than their right hip and their left shoulder a lot lower, it'll remain a little bit lower typically early in transition because it's starting from a lower position. The guys that we'll see that turn more level, so they don't have as much tilt to the pelvis, they don't have as much shoulder tilt here as an Adam Scott, then obviously as they begin down, it's not going to be as drastic, they'll level out sooner. So it's relative to where they go back. But the point we're watching is as they begin their transition phases, once they start down, their left hip is still going to be lower than their right hip. And their left shoulder is still going to be lower than their right shoulder, right? So their left hip is here. Oops. So left part of the pelvis is here. Right part of the pelvis is still here. Now it's going to go from being lower, it's going to gradually start to level out. Obviously the left shoulder is still quite a bit lower than the right shoulder. So there's a shift and a turn happening here, but it remains lower in the early part. The point is, when you watch players who go up right away, they have no rotation. We watch players that have this left side of the pelvis lower and remain the left shoulder lower as they are turning. The rotation pieces are a lot easier. Obviously here, hands about mid-torso, left part of the hips still slightly lower than the right, left shoulder still lower than the left. And then by the time he gets about to his hands about hip height here, we'll see that the pelvis is reasonably level here, depending upon where you measure it from. It's pretty darn close. Left shoulder still lower than the right shoulder from the face on. By the time he gets down to last parallel, now the shoulders will level out, right? So by the time his hands get about to his right thigh, so kind of between this frame here, is where his, now again, this depends on, you can, where your shoulder is in space, you can retract your shoulder, press your shoulder forward, depress your shoulder blade, so it depends on where this is at. It's part of why this looks that way, but now we're getting into a position where the shoulders here are reasonably level or closer to level. So he's hitting a shorter iron. This is sort of a common pattern. I pick him because he's a pretty neutral swing here, Adam Scott. So with these shorter irons at the top, again, left side of the hips lower than the right side of the hips, left shoulder lower than the right shoulder. They remain lower, both of them. Left hip gets lower, right shoulder or left shoulder stays lower. Into the downswing phases, hips level out by the time the hands are about hip high. Shoulders level out about by the time the hands are down to the thigh, or last parallel. It's a pretty common pattern for neutral swingers with the shorter irons. Now again, there's going to be different patterns. There's different guys who do different things. Guys that turn back a little bit more level obviously are not going to have quite as much of that. Here's a Grant Waite here. We'll look at him from the face on as also a good example. So at the top again, we see that left hip a little bit lower than the right hip, left shoulder lower. In the early transition phases, that remains lower as he starts to level out about here. Right, and then he'll kick into his extension pieces. And there's different matchups for these things. Here's a Justin Thomas using a driver here. If we get him up to the top, here again we'll see the left hip lower than the right hip. What I'm looking for is just in the early phases of the downswing, that left hip right there. See that at his initial shift move, that left hip remains lower as he turns, and now he levels out here, right? That's the point. It doesn't matter as much how long you do it. It's that your first move when you go is there, and that left hip is a little bit lower. And there's a million different examples that we can use on here, and the point sort of remains the same. Here's a Thomas Peters, who I think has a phenomenal golf swing. We'll see him at the top here. So this angle's a little bit crooked, but you still see the same thing. Watch the initial rotation movement, right? So see how that left hip remains. It's just a little bit lower as he starts his little shift forward. The pelvis is lower, and then he levels it out as he's turning, unwinding. This is an awesome shot for the rotation pieces. Look how open he gets. So the point of that is, right, left hip, left shoulder from the top should be lower than the right. Keep them lower as you begin your initial transition phases. Hey guys, thanks for watching. If you guys like this video, please do me a favor, click the like button down below, click the notification bell if you haven't, and if you haven't subscribed already, please do so below. Thank you.